Hello and welcome to our fourth video on statistics. I'm Mr. Chowdhury and today we're going to be looking at measures of spread. So if you haven't already, I suggest you go watch our videos on measures of central tendency, which includes the mean, the mode and the median. But today we're going to be looking at measures of spread and how we can measure measures of spread and how we work those things out. So before we do any of that, we need to know what a measure of spread is. Before we do any of that, we need to know what a measure of spread is. And a measure of spread is a way in which we can see how spread out a data set is. So data within a data set, how spread is it? And we use different measures of spread to do this. And the measures of spread we use are as follows. We include range, quartiles, and variance. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video and try and come up with a definition for as many of these words as you can. Some of them you may have seen before, others you wouldn't have, but range, quartiles, and variance are how we measure spread, and they are all measures of spread. So pause the video, have a go at that, please. Okay, so let's get some definitions down. Our first definition is for the range. The range is the difference between the largest and the smallest data point in a data set. So you take the biggest one and you take the smallest one, you find the difference between the two. Quartiles are the data points that are the quarters of a data set. So each quarter of the data set. So 1 quarter, 2 quarters would be the median, and then 3 quarters. The 1 quarter and 3 quarters are what we call the quartiles, and the last one is your variance, and that is the average of the squared differences from the mean. Now, for now, you don't need to worry about variance. The ones we're going to focus on the most are range and quartiles. So you don't need to worry about the variance. The ones we're going to focus on the most are range and quartiles. Now, we're not going to look at how to find the range. That's pretty simple, and you've probably learned that in primary school. However, quartiles are a little bit more difficult. So here are 2 questions. And we're going to find the lower quartile and the upper quartile. Notice that the data set themselves is exactly the same. The data set themselves is exactly the same. So before we can find any quartiles, the first thing we need to do is find the median. Now, if you go back and think to our video on measures of central tendency, we looked at how to find the median of a data set. And what we're going to do is we're going to cross out the data from each end until we get to the midpoint. We're going to cross out the data from each end until we get to the midpoint. So if you watch that now as an animation, we cross out the 1 and the 7, we cross out the 1 and the 6, we cross out the 2 and the 5, and that means that 3 is our median. 3 is our median. Now, once we know what the median is, to find a quartile, all we need to do is find the median of the bottom half of data and the median of the top half of data is to find the upper quartile. And to find the lower quartile, we find the median of the bottom half of the data. Similarly, if you were wanting to find a quarter of a number, you could halve it and then halve it again. So now we've halved the data set. So now we've got 1, 1, 2 as the bottom half of our data set. And we're going to find the median of that data set. So we're going to find the middle of that data set. So then we end up crossing out the 1 and the 2, which leaves the remaining 1, and that is our lower quartile. So our lower quartile is 1. Now let's look at our upper quartile. We do exactly the same thing again. We find the median, which is 3. We look at the top half of the data. So we're looking at these 3 numbers, 5, 6, 7, and then we find the median of 5, 6, 7. What's the middle of 5, 6, 7? So if you cross out the 5 and the 7, we're left with the 6. So our upper quartile is 6 and our lower quartile is 1. Okay, so we can find the quartiles for data sets which look like this, where we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sets of data. But what about this one? What's the same? What's different? Pause the video. What do you think? Okay, so the key difference that you should have noticed between this data, is that we have an even set of data. So we have 8 numbers here instead of 7 in our previous, and we can see how this changes our value. Another key thing that you need to remember from what we just did earlier is that we never want to include the median when we're finding our quartiles. So once we found the median, we use that to give us a marker for where our quartiles will be, but we never want to include that number within our search for the quartile. So let's look at the first one. We're going to find the lower quartile. So we're going to find the median first. So I cross off from both ends, and I notice that my median is between 3 and 5, which happens to be 4. And of course that's going to happen because we have an even data set. So the middle of an even data set will not give us a single value like it does with an odd data set. So we have to look between 3 and 5, which in our case is 4. So we're not going to include 4, and we're going to look for the lower quartile. So here's the lower half of our data, which is 1, 1, 3, 3. And we find the median of that set of numbers. So we cross off from either side, and we notice that our median is between 1 and 3. And the only number between 1 and 3 is 2. So our lower quartile is going to be 2. The lower quartile is the median of the bottom half of our data. So we're not actually doing any new skills. We're just applying a skill we already have, finding the median in a different context. So it's not that much more difficult than anything we've done before. Now let's have a look at this one now. Same kind of thing. We're going to find the median. It's the exact same data set, so the median's still 4. Now we're going to look at the top half of the data, and we're going to find the middle of the top half, which will give us our upper quartile. So the number between 6 and 8, is 7. So our upper quartile is 7, and our lower quartile is 2. Okay, now here's another data set. That I'd like you to look at. Remember, what's the same, what's different? And the other thing we need to remember is that we never want to include the median. What I'd like you to do is pause the video and have a go at this question. Just pause the video, have a go at this question, and we'll go through the answers in a second. Okay, so let's have a look at what the similarities and differences are between this data set and the one we had before. And to actually see the key similarity and the key difference, the similarity being that they're the same number of data points, so there are 8 in both. The difference appears when you start answering the question. So we're going to answer the top bit, and we're going to work out the lower quartile. So first thing we do, we find the median, which is still 4. That hasn't changed, so it's exactly the same. The median is still 4. However, let's have a look at what happens when we try and find the lower quartile. So once again, we're going to find the middle of our bottom half of our data. We're going to find the middle of the bottom half of our data. So we're going to cross off on both sides. And we're looking for a number between 1 and 2. Now, there's no whole number between 1 and 2. In the previous question, we had a whole number. It was between 1 and 3, so 2 was the value. Here, we're trying to find the value between 1 and 2, and that has to be 1.5. So our lower quartile is 1.5. Once again, similar to the other question, our lower quartile actually isn't in the data set. Which is very interesting. And our median isn't in the data set either. And that's something that we need to be aware of, that sometimes when we're finding medians and quartiles, the values will not be in our data set. Now let's have a look at the upper quartile. Once again, we find the median, which is 4. Then we find the middle of the top half of the data. Which in this situation is 6.5, and that's our upper quartile. Now, before we do anything and before we wrap up this lesson, what I'd like you to do is answer some of these questions. You can pause the video, have a go at however many you want. If you're feeling confident, just have a go at the last one. If you're feeling like you need a bit more practice, have a go at all of them. The answers will be given in the order of range, lower quartile, then upper quartile. Pause the video, have a go at that, please. Okay, so here are the answers. The answer to question 1 is 4 for the range, 1 for the lower quartile, 4.5 for the upper quartile. Question 2, 5 for the range, 1 for the lower quartile, 5 for the upper quartile. 6 for the range, 1 for the lower quartile, 5 for the upper quartile. 5 for the range, 1 for the lower quartile, 5 for the upper quartile. So now we have finished, and we just need to summarize this. So once again, you can screen grab this, or you can just write this down. The key things to take from this video was that measures of spread tell us how spread the data is, what's the difference between the top end and the bottom end, how far apart are each of the values. We can see that from working out the range and the quartiles. That will tell us how spread the data is, and that will help us analyze the data when we go to analyze it. The other thing we need to know is that quartiles are when we're splitting the data into quarters. Quartiles are when we're splitting the data into quarters. And finally, to find the lower quartile and the upper quartile, we need to find the median first. So we split the data into a top half and a bottom half, and then we find the middle of the bottom half for the lower quartile, and we find the middle of the top half for the upper quartile. Hopefully that's been helpful, and you have you feel a bit more confident about this, what I suggest you do now is you go and watch Mr. Amoson's video and do some practice. If you're super confident, you can go on Dr. Frost and Corbett Maths to do some more practice. Go off, be productive, and I'll see you in the next video.